So I want to welcome the reunion project musicians that were visited to Umass. Professor Felipe Salles got one of our faculty fellowships for the year, and this was the project that he proposed. And so today we are having this small conversation, and tomorrow they have a 35th annual jazz showcase at Bowker Auditorium at Cemetery. So they will be playing tomorrow. So Professor Felipe Salles is a Rico Reed's artist and an Andreas Gisman saxophones artist and clinician. He's a native of Sao Paulo, Brazil. He's an assistant professor of jazz and African American music studies and an active saxophonist, composer, and arranger who has worked and recorded with many prominent jazz artists. Felipe Salles holds a Master of Music degree in Jazz Studies from New England Conservatory and is the first candidate ever to graduate with a doctorate degree in Jazz Advancement from the Manhattan School of Music. Before coming to the U.S., Professor Salles performed with numerous Brazilian artists. He has toured extensively in Europe, North and South America, India, and Australia, both as a sideman and as a leader of his own group. His arrangements and compositions have been performed by many orchestras and ensembles. Felipe Salles' fifth CD, Departure, received rave reviews. A featured review in Jazz Times magazine said Felipe Salles blends the visceral and the cerebral on his fascinating fifth album, infusing classical modernist strains with the buoyant rhythm of his Brazilian homeland. He has been with us since 2010. And this is his project.
Thank you. Let me introduce the members of this project who are, I have the honor and privilege to have here lots of people who I know from a long time. Chico Pinheiro is officially my oldest friend. I don't remember when we met, but I know that I was told that it was around, I don't know, 3 years old or something.
3?
Yeah, we went to daycare together, and we studied together all the way to the end of high school. So we went to different colleges. So he's been an incredible influence and inspiration. He's one of the great new Brazilian jazz artists, and I'm very happy to have him here. And this is Thiago Costa, also a arranger, pianist, composer. Thiago and I met about 25 years, something like that. We went to school together, to college together, so around the time when Chico and I stopped studying together, I met this guy, and I was telling my students recently that,
Felipe, can you
speak louder. These guys are like the guys I went to school when I was your age. Thiago has performed with many really important Brazilian artists. Maria Rita being the one that I think is more known around here. He's been a musical director and arranger for a lot of the projects. Thiago Costa. Eduardo Ribeiro is the drummer, and probably one of the most, I don't know, I think he's probably the drummer I know that everybody was playing with and have in their recordings. He's recorded many CDs. Recently got a Latin Grammy and a Grammy for one of his records for Plaza de Rivera, which was a Latin Grammy and a Grammy last year. And we just found out a little before we came, right, that the record that Eliane is recording, that he's in, just won a Grammy also. So is a very important drummer in Brazilian music, in my opinion. And I imagine that a lot of other people's opinions, since she's been stacking Grammys lately. And Bruno Ligoto is the only one who didn't go to school with us because he, I think, was the bass back then. We did some. We're not going to talk numbers, but I realized the other day that when I started playing saxophone, Bruno was about 1 year old. So he got up pretty fast. Yeah, he was already. But it's an honor and privilege to have him with us. He's one of the most talented and hard-working bass players in Brazil right now. It's good that he can be part of this project. I'm very excited. I've been wanting to bring those guys here for a long time. It's also interesting to talk a little bit about our background. We all come from a generation where most of our parents lived through a very important time in Brazilian music history, but also a very important time in Brazilian history. We're all kind of considered to be a generation that came from the Brazilian dictatorship. My parents never voted for president until about the same time I voted. We were all about 16 years old when they passed a law where we could actually vote for president, and that was the first election, free election for president in 25 years. So that, on one hand, that was a very difficult time in Brazilian history, but on the other hand, if you look at the history of Brazilian music, it was an incredibly fruitful and important time, especially for the popular songwriting in Brazil. I think it flourished a lot from the fact that there was so much repression and so much censorship going on at that time. And so we grew up with that background. We grew up with that kind of music, and I think we felt very drawn to writing music, popular music of great quality, which was something that I think Brazil has always been known for since the bossa nova era. So I'll ask them to talk a little bit more about their personal history, how it works with the history of Brazilian music. Who wants to go first? Barbara?
Thank you, Felipe, for a great introduction. As Felipe just said, we grew up together in a city that I feel lucky to have been raised in São Paulo, because it's like a huge city with a lot of different cultures, but really it's very mixed. São Paulo, it's a very particular place. I think it's kind of more similar to other the big Latin American cities where you have all these cultures a very and especially the music. So I grew up listening to all kinds of music. And of course not just Brazilian music, but mostly Brazilian music, but as well as Cuban music, jazz, American jazz, European music, classical music, and I think I feel lucky as well because even though the times that it was a very tough period, not just politically but economically, we faced my parents. Not that we were in a kind of a comfortable situation, but the country was suffering a lot. But on the other hand, as you just told, it was a very rich period as far as a lot of things were going on, and it was very, very inspiring, to see all of this. We saw the generation that came just after the Bossa Nova generation, which is like Chico Buarque, Milton Nascimento, Elis Regina, Caetano Veloso, Gilberto Gil, all these great guys, not just great musicians, but great artists. They inspired us in all kinds of ways, like by all means. So I used to listen to a lot of, like before I started listening to instrumental music, jazz, I started listening to Brazilian popular music, which has a very, very particular structure, because like most of the songs, if you take, let's say the American, like a great songbook, the lyrics are, I don't want to like how do you say, like I mean, most of the songs, like as they were like written for Broadway tunes, they have like kind of more light, kind of. In Brazil, the lyrics is such an important part of the music, and it's very dense, like all the time. It's something that if you speak Portuguese, you know what I mean. But if you don't speak Portuguese, it's an interesting thing to try to
translate.
To translate, because it's a very, very important thing in Brazilian music. The lyrics, it's such an important aspect of the music. So like I remember paying attention to the lyrics and being like sometimes it's almost like a novel. If you take like Aldir Blanc's certain kinds of, they tell like stories, like a whole life, like some like a one's life in one song, and like such like a kind of a complex kind of story. So I love that part of, like, I'm a jazz player as well, as I think all of us. We love jazz in the sense of like a freedom and improvisation, but I really like this format, like the song, like the lyrics plus the melody plus the harmony. And I think nowadays we are facing some interesting things. I've been talking to a lot of jazz musicians. There's not that many melodies, like out there. Like we have a lot of rap, we have a lot of like a kind of, the rhythm is really, really happening. But as far as like a melody, harmony, it's something that like it's not like we have, but not that many. So. And I think that's a very important part of Brazilian music. Like in Brazil, we still have that. Like some people say, like a ginga, we have some, and so like I think my background came from a lot from there. So when I'm improvising, when I'm playing, I always think about like melodies and even the lyrics. I think that's right. As far as like the structure, that's the thing that, for me, like it stands out. In the Brazilian music, like the lyrics, it's really, really important.
Just to give people who are not so familiar with the history of Brazilian music, give a little perspective of what we're talking about. The Bossa Nova was considered a great movement when it comes to music, but the lyrics in Bossa Nova were, at times considered to be a little bit too bourgeois, per se. And then around the time Bossa Nova became really big, the dictatorship came, and so people felt the need to move to a, not musically speaking, but lyric-wise, move to a more complex and sort of more protest type of lyrics. But at the same time, you have a lot of censorship going on. So in a way, I think this actually gave Brazilians the opportunity to become incredible poets, because you had to say things in a way that weren't going to be caught by the censorship. So the depth of the lyrics, the depth of the images that were created by the lyrics around that time by Chico Buarque.
Yeah, so it's like you had like both like a George Gershwin, like kind of melody with like a rap kind of lyric. It's really like if you take Chico Buarque, it's as powerful as like any like a good rapper. I love, by the way, like some Brazilian rappers, they have like a very strong like a kind of like a good. So like you have these melodies, all these beautiful melodies, rhythm, you have everything, but you have this kind of like a
very
powerful
powerful imagery, and you know, also you have to think about socially what's going on. You know, if you think of Broadway tunes, there's a lot of witty, there's a lot of interesting things going on, but at the end, it's a lot about being a show tune. And I think what Brazilians were dealing at that time period is how do we protest? How do we say the things we want to say and not get arrested, not get tortured, not get caught up, or our music can actually reach the most amount of people, the audience. So when you look at some of the lyrics, it's incredibly powerful and very hard to translate. A lot of it is very, very difficult to translate because it's all about imagery, and you translate and it sounds, to me, I've been here for a long time, when I try to translate certain lyrics, it sounds a lot harsher than it really is. You're trying to put into words things that actually are much more subtle images than, you know, they get lost in translation a lot. So, and I think that I agree with Chico. There's a lot still going on of that kind of writing in Brazil. But at the same time, if you think about, you know, when I grew up, when I was a kid in Brazil, everybody knew the lyrics. And some people still know the lyrics for Tom Jobim, or maybe Chico Buarque or Pixinguinha. And today what's happening now, there's less and less of that sense of like popular songwriting that kind of unifies the country. There was an identity. You would go to a performance and you know, fill up a place like we have a park called Ibirapuera in São Paulo. It's kind of like our central park. So you would have a show there with João Gilberto or somebody like that, and you would have thousands of people singing along with. They knew every single one of the lyrics for every single one of the tunes, and that kind of that was very powerful. And I think today the people who are doing this are not. My impression is, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not living there. It's not reaching as many people as it used to. That kind of songwriting.
I was just curious to ask you guys, like, I'm sure that some of you must not be familiar with that, but when it comes like when we say like a Brazil, what comes to mind? You know, like sometimes it's really interesting. You know, like some people can't come up with like when I say like a Brazil, like of course Carnival. You know, like but I mean as far as the music, you know, like do you guys, any of you guys like?
Is it people that you are mentioning? It's still the people that you are mentioning.
Right?
Correct.
So, yeah. It's like Chicoate, Tom Jobim, which is great. which is because like afterwards, like what defines a place, not just a country, but a place, because I mean, like for instance, the US, it's huge. So if you take Texas, it's completely different from here than it's different from California. It's like in Brazil, if you take, but it's the culture. So like if you take, for instance, when I think about when I was a kid, and somebody would ask me before I came here, like so US, I would say something like whatever, like a jazz, you know, like or the movies, you know, like the Hollywood movies. So like the culture is such like a big part of us, you know, like in Brazil, when you say like Brazil, I'm from Brazil, people smile at you, which is great. You know, like in soccer, of course.
Oh, no, that's not.
Yeah, but so that's like I think it's really interesting what. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's really interesting what Felipe said. Like I remember, it was kind of a bond, right? That you had because everybody knew Chico Buarque's song.
But I think that in that time, Chico Buarque and Tom Jobim, I don't know what happened today, but when I grew up, Brazil is a huge country, and there's just one thing that happens in all the Brazil is the TV, with soap opera novela, soap opera, and in that time, that guys like Tom Jobim, Chico Buarque, Paulinho da Viola, Dori Caymmi, they do a lot of songs for the TV.
They had a lot of space in the media.
They have a lot of space in the media, in the radio. And today, I think that kind of music doesn't have more space in the media.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason that we don't, they didn't renovate a generation. We don't have a new generation of poets and songwriters like this old generation. And if we have, they don't have more space in the media.
If they're somewhere we don't know because the media doesn't support them.
Yeah, of course.
And there's also an important component that what makes Brazilian music Brazilian is that at that time it was very important to these guys, to Gil, to Caetano, to Milton, to do a music that was genuinely Brazilian because of the resistance and because there was
It was a political.
yes, it was a political association. People thought at the time that Americans, the American government was financing some military.
They were they were supporting
yes,
military
supporting.
regime.
So there was this kind of cultural resistance, and they were it was very important, and so they did funk or didn't do American style.
It was a political stand
Yeah.
on top of being a cultural
And then,
identity.
yes, and when the yeah, yes, when it finished, this need to do a Brazilian culture and Brazilian music kind of fade away a little bit. So that's what, in my opinion, make a very special moment in Brazilian music, because it has the lyrics, which has a lot of metaphors, and people listen to it to find the quotes that was the resistance quote. And so it was very important that everybody get united to listen to songs. And also, it was important to do a Brazilian music. So it was very important to do music that communicate with samba and with Brazilian roots rhythms. And that's what made this special moment very unique. And it also
not only the music, but I think
Yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of the artists like Cinema Novo, like
Yeah.
depois do Cinema Novo,
So we had a whole a new cinema movement. We had in all arts in general, there was a sense that you needed to preserve. You had to take a political stand, and you needed to preserve your cultural identity.
Yeah. And that fade out with time. It's kind of pity. But there's still a lot of good music, but it's not the mainstream anymore. Now,
It's a little bit like what I think, trying to trace a parallel, is kind of like what happened to jazz in the U.S. Jazz used to be considered popular music. It used to be considered the American music.
Yeah.
And now, more and more, it becomes a smaller portion of a very small public that are listening to that, and there's no support in the mainstream media.
Exactly.
Still, there's a lot of great music being composed and done and produced, but there's a few people who know what's going on in that field, and the rest, like the large population, just like in Brazil, they're not aware, like they used to be, of what's going on in that kind of cultural production.
Can we interact with you guys and ask you questions as you?
Sure.
It's very interesting because being South American, as you guys, but from the other side, the other coast, it's interesting to hear that, and I know a little bit about, the Brazilian artists, and you guys always kept the poetic side in the popular music, even if it was political.
Yeah.
It didn't happen in the other side. It was very I don't know the term, a lot of proselytism in the lyrics. So the leftists or the resistance within the music, they will be singing, the typical resistant phrases and lyrics that were so obvious, so cool. But Brazil always kept that poetic side, which was very inspiring, even on the rest of Latin America. So, what do you think? What was behind that? The richness in the poetry. Why you guys kept that and developed that it didn't happen in other places?
I think that the weather. the weather.
That would not account for music. That would not account for good music coming from São Paulo. Sorry.
All these people they're from Rio, like Chico Buarque. Chico Buarque is from São Paulo, but I'm just kidding. But I mean, it's the weather.
No, I'm joking with you too.
It's like it's a very interesting question. I think like there was a very great sense of humor actually. Right. If you take like it's never like an anger kind of attitude. Like I think the only song that I can recollect that was kind of like that, it was like a Geraldo Vandré, which was more like this kind of song that you're talking about, like more like no, I have to resist and say. But all the other songs, like Chico Buarque was such a clever guy that he invented como é que se fala um homônimo?
He had an alter.
Exactly. Because
they simply he was so blacklisted that he could write anything. He could just write lyrics that said, "I love my street," and they would censor. It's like Chico Buarque. No, censored.
So
they wouldn't even read it. They would just censor.
They knew that they like.
Yeah, and it was so smart to do the critics inside the lyrics that the censors couldn't get it.
So they started.
So they said, no, this guy is not writing anything.
Yeah, we know that if we let it go, there's something there we didn't get. And people are gonna make fun
Because they weren't
that
real
we
smart,
let it go.
yeah.
So we're just, our the basic attitude was just never let any of his. So he started signing his songs with a different name. So he had a.
And started like some of the lyrics are even like really funny, like it's almost like a laughable, but it's like a terrible, like some lyrics are talking about like
I think they joke with the people from the censorship.
censorship.
I think sometimes they joke.
They didn't have literary
they write
training.
something, and that's gonna see what that people see, if they are going to understand us. And I'm gonna see because they are looking for some word, something, and I used to play with a lot of some musicians like Tokino that they have a lot of music on the censor, and he said sometimes we are recording music, and the guy from the record label says, oh, you can't record this song because the censor called it. Because the censor they said no for this song. We have to change any words, just one word, and they put out this word is not good. If you change this word, you could record it and make your business with that.
It was
But honestly,
pretty
like,
ridiculous.
but I mean, it's different. I noticed like if you take like Argentinians in Argentina, which was pretty bad as well. Like I feel like it was more like a very clear. If you take, as we said, like you could say like, oh, this is totally against it, but in Brazil it was different. You're right. Like a lot of people they wouldn't like fight the system like totally openly. I don't know if I'm saying like I'm being clear about that, but I mean they wouldn't do it in a certain way. There was kind of this guy, like a kind of, and it would be very effective. You look and not only in the music, but I mean some of the directors like Celso Martinez. It happened in a lot of different forms, art forms. But the thing is, like, we are talking about this period because this period, I think, for all of it, is very, very important. Our parents came from that. My mom used to like hide people
My dad was hiding my
exactly,
mom,
that was-
and my
exactly,
dad
like
got arrested.
so like we've heard of a lot of stories about it, like from very like close people, and I think all of us probably like heard about stories and stuff.
I have a question because I'm not sure I agree with you guys in what you're saying. On one end, I think that Brazilian music, and I wanted to hear you talking about some of the more recent people. I don't think that Brazilian music lost its appetite for criticism, for social criticism, after the military government was over. The military government, during the military dictatorship, there was a specific target, right? So there was censorship and there was a specific target. But then I wanted to hear you talk, and I was like putting some names while you were talking, right? So to hear you talk about Chico César, Zé Cabaleiro, Tribalista, Cazuza, Legião, Rapa, Paralamas, Emicida, MV Bill. It's like so many people that came, and if we talk about like great music, I mean, we still have a lot, and those are not really unknown artists, right? They are writing great protest songs.
Yeah, but it's different.
But it's like they're talking about racism.
Yes, but it's different.
They're talking
because
about
the thing that fade away mostly, it was the need to do a Brazilian music. That fade away mostly.
Yeah.
Because Cazuza does a song that is not Brazilian.
At all.
Right, what we were trying to say,
Okay,
I mean,
but
the
you have
need to
to
complain about things is always gonna be there, that's a Brazilian thing.
Yeah.
But the need of having a political stand that means, you know, we are not caving into influences from other, like American influences, for example, in music. That faded away.
There was a
over time.
protest that was organized against the electric guitar.
Well, but that's what I was saying. I
Yeah.
mean, Caetano started the whole movement of incorporating American or external,
Right.
and and then people severely criticized him, and that was done during the military. So, I mean, isn't it what made Brazilian
Actually,
music?
wasn't him, it wasn't Rogério Duprá.
Uh-huh.
Rogério Duprá made the arrangement and put the Argentinian group to play with them, right? Like you're talking about the festival.
Hip-Hop 1967.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
It was Rogério Duprá.
Uh-huh.
But I know, but what I agree with you. Like there was a criticism, but right after that, in the 80s, we had the Rock Brazil, which is the name itself explains
Right.
the rock, Brazil rock, which is like just before that in the 70s, which was the worst period of there was nobody could hear about rock because like people were totally against like the idea of like a U.S. like a financially
That was
helping financially like the dictator in Brazil, which like kind of happened, it was very complex, but we're not gonna talk about politics here because I'm not an expert, but I mean as far as the music I know because so like a lot of people in the if you take like not the bossa nova people, but just after the bossa nova, which is like all these like a great like Caetano, Milton, Elis. Elis was kind of very they criticized Elis a lot. Infield, all these guys from this generation, they were totally against like a rock and roll, against like all kinds of influences as far as American music. After that, in the 80s, we have this period that was like a kind of fade away, and we have like a lot of like a rock band, Paralamas, and in the beginning, if you take the first record of Paralamas, wasn't like at all, was kind of totally happy music, and like a love songs and stuff,
Yeah.
and all this like a
We went to those shows.
Yeah,
But
those show-
wouldn't you say that? Let's take an example.
in the 90s, but it's important, like in the 90s, and after that, and with the influence of rap, like Emicida is a rapper, right? Like with the influence of rap, and then we started again like a protest against like a totally like all kinds of different things, like racism, and that. But like back in the day, like it was specific against something, and that brought everybody together.
Yeah.
So Chico Buarque told something that is very important. Back in the day, the music, como se diz teatro, como like the not play music, like como se diz, artes plásticas, todas as artes.
The fine arts.
Yeah, the arts, like, they were much more like a, you know, like
A movement.
the movement was like, they were like, or they were really like together, it's like a cinema, you know, like a movie. After that, we don't, it's very interesting, we don't, it seems that everybody's on, in its own like a,
Right.
like a doing it own, it's not like a kind of, you know what I'm saying, like a Chico Cesar, which I have a lot of songs with him, and I played with him for a long time. I recorded, and he wrote some of my lyrics. It's by Chico Cesar. He's a great example. He's a very, very, like a clever guy and a very political guy. Not for nothing, he went and he stopped doing like for a couple of years, like Gilberto Gil, doing songs, writing songs, and he went to Paraíba to be the, como se diz, o secretário da cultura,
Right.
the culture secretary, and he helped a lot with that. So, like, but I know what you're saying, like, but it was kind of a different, it was much more like a,
Yeah, now there is no one single enemy, right?
Yes,
But
exactly.
but to say, for example, I don't know, I'm not a musician, right? So you guys are the experts in the music part. But to say that Zé Cabaleiro and Chico Cesar, for example, don't do Brazilian music or pure Brazilian music, right? Or
no,
is
they,
it-
No, they
are
do.
they are
They do.
I think
Yes,
they're
also,
good representatives.
no, we're not
Science.
saying that, like,
Uh-huh.
please don't take us wrong.
Yeah.
I love Chico Cesar.
If you listen to Legião Urbana or Barão do Sucesso in the 90s, it's like a U2 or a
Mhm.
group
Yeah,
that
that's a-
could have in any part of the world, except about the lyrics.
Yeah.
But if you listen to Chico Silence, there is from Recife,
Mhm.
and any part of the world could do the music like they do. And I think that is different because sometimes you listen to some music that could be do fatal, okay?
They make that.
Could be made in any part of the world, you know.
I think it's different.
Except about the language. In Brazil, there are some particular things that sometimes I was so scared about. Sometimes I was in the south. I played with Yamandu Boss, he's a great guitar player, and he's from the south. And we went to not in Porto Alegre, that is the capital from the south, but we went from the como é que é? Interior.
Countryside?
We went to the countryside, and after the show, he said, I wanna bring you the fantastic place. Sorry about my bad English. And we went to a place that was so crowded. People like teenagers and for 13 years, young people, and everybody was like a character with the clothes from the south, and they just played music from that part that I didn't know. I didn't know that it's not playing in the radio, and was crowded, and people was having fun, and people was singing, and was some culture from that part of the world. You can see that in another part, and that was is the difference. If you saw a Legião Urbana show, you could see some show in Croatia and Europe could sound like a band, but that kind of music you could see just in that part of Brazil. I think that happens in Northeast. It's a huge country, and I don't know about any part of the country, but I know that if you go to Northeast of the North, there are different music, there are different composers that we know, and they didn't came to the radio.
To the
I
mainstream.
think that part in Brazil, the dictatorial, people has to be to do a Brazilian music, a different kind of music that bring that part from us.
And this is
I have a question, you allow me.
Sure.
I am very impressed with your description of the resistance and the way that the lyrics were very dense, sophisticated in order to avoid, overcome censorship. And given the case that military censors across the world have the reputation of not being very intelligent, My question to you, I have several questions. First, did the deeper message that was encoded in the lyrics that basically escaped the military geniuses, did that message reach a wider audience? That is to say, were people listening on the radio were able to identify, to decipher what the poet was attempting to say? So whether that's a question, whether the code was deciphered by the people, even though it was completely lost and missed by the military censors. The second question is, once the military censors realized that they had made a mistake, but the lyrics were already in the open, did they censor that after the songs were already well known by the Brazilian people? So those are the two questions, because for me it's deeply interesting the way that resistance can express itself through different codes that the powers that be are not going to understand.
Right. I can't claim to say that it reached everybody, but it certainly reached all the people who were involved and politically active. I mean, I remember knowing, as little kids, we knew lyrics. We knew some deep lyrics. My father used to say, the first tune I've ever learned how to sing at, I don't know, 2 years old or something, was Nabatucado da Vida. It's a very difficult tune with really incredibly deep, difficult lyrics, and Elis Regina had recorded that around the time it was like 2 or 3 or something. And my parents, I mean, they would get, I mean, also you have to think about what the media is today versus what the media was back then. You know, today my students go on YouTube and they are flooded with stuff. We would wait for a record to come out. We would go to the store, we get that record, we would sit with that record for days and days. And I remember my father coming from the record store with a new, you know, Caetano record or a Chico Buarque record, Elis Regina record, and putting on the record player and playing it over and over and over and over again for hours. I knew all those songs by osmosis, because I was playing there on the floor with my cars and whatnot, and we knew that. It was like everybody knew it because it was so powerful, and people just lived with it in a different way that they do today, you know. I felt a very similar thing when I visited Cuba many years ago, because when the situation there is what it is and was worse than it is now, you would go to a jam session and people would play, everybody would know the same tunes, and they would know all the solos. Like, so let's say Dizzy Gillespie recorded an album with Paquito de Rivera. Somebody would smuggle that in. That would be a CD or a cassette tape. Everybody would copy that cassette tape from everybody. Everybody would learn all the tunes, everybody would learn all the solos. The piano players would be playing all the piano players' solos. It was incredible. That, the fact that it was so difficult to get your hands on that, or for us, that it would take so long, or there was limited resources. I had an allowance, and I could get 2 records per month or something like that. And those were the records I lived with for a month. Yeah. So I better choose carefully, and I better enjoy those 2 more, you know. And now it's like, you know, people don't even pay for music anymore. Let's not go in that direction. But I think that the people that, I mean, of course, you can't say that the entire country was deciphering those messages, but there was the difference to me is I would go to a concert, a live concert of Caetano or Gil or Chico, and there would be people of all classes, all economic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and they would know the lyrics. They would all know.
I think that's the main
everything.
difference.
And that's not like this anymore. I don't think.
And I think that's the main difference. Excuse me, what's your name?
Luis,
Luis. Where are you from, Luis?
I'm from Rio.
From Rio. What? So Luis, you know that like I think the difference nowadays is like Felipe's. I think they said some really interesting stuff here. That there's so many things to talk about, and some interesting. You just told something that is really interesting about Brazil. Like such a huge country, like
There's
here.
a lot of untapped.
Like if you go to Recife,
Stop.
which is a very like if you go to the northeast part of Brazil, if you go to Recife, it's like it's a whole world itself. You know, like there's so many rhythms, and we are very. Brazilian music has this very like a strong sense of rhythm, which some musics, some kinds of music doesn't. Brazilian music has everything is about the rhythm. You know, like melodies. You know, if you take a Chico Buarque melody, if you take any melody, like a Meto Pascoal melody, or it's like there's a very strong sense of rhythm there. You know, like in the like a pop music, you know, like a kind of a chamber music, which is like if you take like the most complex music in Brazil, which is like from Villa Lobos to Chorinho, there's a strong sense of rhythm. You know, like so we always like our music. It's very like. The foundation is rhythm, right? It's on the rhythm. So it doesn't matter how like sweet, how complex, you know, like the harmonies, but there's a rhythm there. And if one of these guys like from the '60s would listen to my music, they would say, man, you're more like you're totally American, you know, like you're influenced because I love the European harmonies, and I love like this kind of like a jazz harmonies, but I think my music, Felipe's music, like Thiago's music, I can tell like Bruno and Edu, I know their music, they're very the foundation is like the Brazilian rhythms. You know, like we love the Brazilian rhythms. And I think that's what put Brazil, like one of the things that put the Brazilian music apart from the other like music, you know, like all kinds of music. You know, like there's a very particular kind of rhythm. Besides that, you have all these different regions, like the south, you have northeast, you have Rio, which is a complete like a world itself, like my dad is from Rio too. And you have the kind of the middle of the country, like you have all this, if you take like Minas Gerais is a whole, so you have all this, but every kind of music in Brazil has a strong sense of rhythm. And in the phrasing, you know, like in the rhythm session, you know, like you have like it's always like kind of deep, you know, like and have a lot of different rhythms. And I think there's something about answer your question again. There's something about the Brazilian music. There is every American. I have a lot of friends from here. They told me something that is very interesting. That. The Brazilian music has like this kind of very this aspect of gathering people. It's different. It's different than like if you listen to jazz or the jazz itself. It's not the kind of music that gather people like amateurs. You have to know the code. You know, you don't say like you never played an instrument, never was trained, and say, okay, can I play the trumpet? No, you don't go to a jam session if you're not really well trained. It's not that way in Brazilian music. The bossa nova started in an apartment with people like singing together. Nara Leão wasn't a professional singer.
No.
And then, you know, like the Brazilian music was all about gathering people. The chorinho is like that.
It was a hang.
It was a hang.
A lot of what happened was happening in somebody's living room, and it was a hang. And people just got together. There was well, I mean, if you think of, I don't want to talk like an ethnomusicology, but it's good to understand a little bit of the difference between Brazilian music and jazz in the sense of how it came about when it comes to the influence of African music. And when you think about the way Brazil was colonized versus America, the U.S., there was, the Portuguese had been very familiar with, the Moors that had invaded Spain and etc. And they weren't as much as afraid of the African influence as the English came here. So when you look at the way things were dealt with culturally, I always make fun of this when I talk about this with my students, you know, the Portuguese, they just didn't know how to be very austere in their treatment. So they told the slaves, you can only play the drums and, you know, do your thing on holidays. But in Brazil, back in those days, between civic holidays and church holidays, there were something like, I don't know the exact number at this point, but there was something like 180 days. So every other day you could play the drums. So you see that there's a huge difference in the way the music shaped by the fact that culturally you have a much greater influence of African music than you, for example, had here. And of course, those kind of influences just move around a lot. And I want to go back to something you said about Caetano Veloso, because Caetano, the whole Tropicalia movement, which is what you were referring to, comes a lot from the idea that Mário de Andrade and Oswald de Andrade brought in the 20s, which is this idea, okay, there's an external influence, and we're going to be corrupted by that somehow. But if we're going to be corrupted by that, let's do it our way. Let's, you know, there's the movimento antropofágico. How do you translate that? Anthropophagy? I mean, it's basically the guys imagined that the cultural movement would be like a cannibal. So you just eat up this whole thing and then you spit it out your own way, you know. So okay, we're not gonna survive we're not gonna be able to resist the electric guitar, but if we're going to do this, let's digest Jimi Hendrix and just regurgitate in the Brazilian way, per se, right? Yeah. Was that? Right. Yeah. So that is important to see that even when there was that kind of influence, there was a clear political statement, cultural statement saying, okay, yeah, all right, we're surrounded, but we're going to go down our own way here. You know, we're going to make a stand, a cultural stand, and you know, there's never. I think there's always been in Brazilian music since the bossa nova this flirt with American music and a bit of a, you know, one of the reasons I think that the protest music didn't go in the direction that it went in the rest of Latin America was the fact that that we were too seduced by harmonies and beautiful melodies and this kind of poetry. We were already sort of seduced by that, and we didn't want to give it up. There were some people who wanted to, even Nada Leon, she at some point publicly went against the bossa nova and said that she would only sing and do protest music, but it was just like, the music was so beautiful, the poetry was so rich, nobody really wanted to give it up completely, you know. So they found a different way, which I think it goes back to the idea of, you know, eating it all up and regurgitating it your own way. And they found a way to protest that was, in my opinion, more Brazilian than sort of like more kind of like because if you think about the protest music, it's in a way also important. It's just important from a different source, right? You had the Americans on one side, and then you had the whole, you know, Russian, Cuban thing going on the other side. So you're importing something from there too. It's not necessarily Brazilian or Latin American.
Rhythms that came from Africa, and then the how is like Brazilian music, just like maybe sometimes of Indian music, but that's
right.
Like everything else came from.
If you want to go back to the purest of the pure stuff, you're gonna play native Brazilian, Indian music, which is not a huge part of how Brazilian. It didn't play, let's say, a huge role in the way Brazilian music developed and became what it was.
Which is very important. Sorry, something is very important that a good friend of mine called Leite told me that is really cool, actually, is that we imported a lot of the African rhythms, right? The slaves that came to Brazil. But some of the rhythms are truly Brazilian.
Yes.
Why? Because some of the slaves, there was a lot of different tribes there, and a lot of different, they were totally enemies. And the first time that they were put together were in the ships. So they started to kind of talk to each other, and some of the rhythms that they have in different parts of Africa blended from the first time in Brazil. So for instance, if you take the Ijexá is a blend of two different rhythms. They don't have that in Africa. They just have that in Brazil. Some of the rhythms that they have in Brazil are like different rhythms from different parts of Africa, enemies that came together in Brazil. So this kind of, from this horrible thing, like you created like beautiful things. And so nowadays, like, when you listen to this kind of rhythms, and which, as I told you, like it's a very strong part of Brazilian music, they were truly Brazilians. They were they were born in Brazil.
Right, even if you think of the word samba, nobody really knows where it comes from. Nobody knows if it was originally a Bantu word or not. But and there's the rhythm that samba comes from. Some people say it came from a rhythm that came from Africa. Some people say that it was actually developed in Brazil, and nobody really can trace exactly what happened. There's this gray area of, and then there's the big fight between Rio and Bahia. That, there's the famous phrase that says that samba was born in Bahia but actually grew up in Rio, right? Because the germs, rhythmic, germs of samba come from Bahia, but samba itself is an urban tradition. It's an urban rhythm that actually developed and became what came to be Rio.
Interesting, because there is a counterpart that, theory. People think that salsa was born in New York.
There's, the New Rican idea, right? Yeah,
Although
exactly.
the roots of salsa are Cuban, and the son cubano and the rumba.
Right.
But that particular form, that particular expression took place in New York City.
Right.
With the immigrants from Cuba and Puerto Rico.
Right, and I mean, if you can even go further back and talk about the idea of some of the claves there in Cuba and how their names come from Spanish places and things like that. So at the same time, you're talking about this, but it's very hard to see where things actually start or end, because there's no exact moment where you can claim this to be here or claim this to be there.
I don't want to get in the way of you answering his question about whether it was like retroactively censored after it was discovered that there was a subversive meaning to it. But the question that I have really burning is whether you view music as something that's fundamentally like proactive, something that the artist says this is something that should be the case, or this is what I feel, and you put it out there and you kind of change culture, or whether it's more symptomatic of the environment that it's born out of, and that it's really a reflection of that culture.
That is a very good question, and I don't have an answer for it exactly, but I think it's a little bit of both. For example, I think we are a product of our environment. We are a generation that comes from parents who lived a dictatorship. We grew up in a dictatorship. But we also the first generation of musicians who were educated in the university. And Thiago, Edu, and I went to the very first university program for music that was created for popular music. Because before that, you could only study music in the university if you were going to become a classical musician, which to me has always been insane. I was like, I remember looking at that and going, thank goodness that somebody invented this program a few years before I had to go to school, because I am not doing that other thing. I have nothing.
Where was it?
It was in São Paulo, Campinas.
Unicamp.
Campinas, Unicamp was the very first program in popular music. And it started in 1990. 89. I went there. You're from the 90, and I'm from 91, and Edu got there in 90, right? Yeah, we're all second, third, and fourth year of the course. For you to have an idea, I didn't get my diploma until many years after, because they were still getting it approved by the Department of Education. So for a while, it was in this limbo, going like, oh, I hope that they approve it. I just spent 4 years of my life doing a degree that might not be approved. But eventually they sent that piece of paper over. I have mine hanging in my.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, did you go Saturday to that carnival in the Fine Arts Center?
I did not. I was
Yeah, you
getting
were with
these
them.
guys.
Yeah.
I actually, they called me and they asked if I could actually mediate the panel, but I was picking those guys at the end.
Yeah.
It's just good.
Because it was something happened that I didn't expect. There was a group from Haiti, a singer from Jamaica, and a group from Brazil.
Uh-huh.
And I did not expect at all that the group from Brazil was the most mellow, calmer, and sounded absolutely less black. I mean, totally different
Wow.
than the other groups. It was.
Which group was it?
Casualina.
Oh, Casualina. Ah, no, but what I was in Casualina.
Yeah, very traditional, very, type of stuff, and it was very, I mean, I loved it, but I wasn't expecting that
Yeah.
total.
But see, I think sometimes when we talk about Brazilian music, we just assume that everything comes from the African tradition, but there's a lot of other things, from the South and from other places where there's other, gradations of different influences. And if you look at the Northeast, there's things that sound very African and things that don't sound as.
And just thinking about the rhythm, just the accent from the region makes totally different. It's the same rhythm, but with the different accent.
Yeah.
It's like the same, different word for the same thing, but
Right.
make a different.
Yeah, the accent is an incredible. Incredible, and sometimes we don't realize that, but the language and the music are so connected that when sometimes you listen to rhythms being played in different regions, just because people talk differently.